The conference room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and dry erase markers, the kind of stale combination you only notice when everyone goes quiet. I stood near the end of the long oak table, 20 sets of eyes fixed on me, waiting for the spectacle they didn't know they were about to get. My boss, Linda Hayes, stood at the head of the room, lips curled like she was about to deliver a sermon. She tapped a manicured finger against the table once, twice, just enough to make the tension hum. "Let's all congratulate Daniel Mercer," she said, her voice syrupy with false warmth, "our very own senior project manager, who decided he'd rather work somewhere else after we so generously kept him here all these years." The room shifted. A few people glanced at me. A couple lowered their eyes. My chest didn't tighten. My pulse didn't quicken. I just breathed, steady and slow. She let the silence linger, then added, "Daniel, after denying your raise request every single year, because frankly you never earned it, I hear you had the audacity to apply somewhere else. Imagine my shock." The sarcasm dripped heavy. I didn't move, didn't defend myself. She leaned closer, hands pressed flat on the table. "You should be grateful, you bastard. But instead, you're fired. Effective immediately." Gasps rippled across the room, little murmurs of disbelief. Someone coughed. Someone else shifted their chair. It felt like a stage play where the script was designed for maximum humiliation. Linda thrived on that. She wanted to break me, to let everyone see how easily loyalty could be crushed and discarded. Instead, I smiled. Not a big smile, not the forced grin of someone trying to save face, just a small measured curl of the lips. I picked up my notebook, slid the pen into the spiral binding, and tucked it under my arm. My gaze drifted across the room, meeting eyes one by one. Most of them couldn't hold it. Some looked ashamed for even being there. A few looked curious, like they'd just realized the man they thought they knew might be carrying something they never saw. I didn't say a word, didn't plead, didn't curse. I walked to the door. That's when I said, calm and even, "Good luck, Linda." And I meant it. The door clicked shut behind me. The echo in the hallway sounded louder than it should have. "My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 38 years old. For the last 12 years, I've worked at a corporate consultancy called Vantage Dynamics, rising from junior analyst to senior project manager. To most people, that makes me a career man, steady, dependable, predictable. The kind of guy who comes in early, stays late, and never leaves tasks unfinished. The kind of guy who asks for a raise politely, gets denied, and still shows up Monday morning with a tie knotted tight and a smile plastered on. But what they never understood was why I always came in before sunrise. Why I walked the halls twice a day, without explanation, counting footsteps, noting exits, memorizing schedules. Why I stayed quiet in meetings, but could recite back every word spoken days later. They chalked it up to quirks, habits of a man too rigid for his own good. They didn't realize those habits were armor. 12 years I gave that company. 12 years I built teams, salvaged doomed projects, and covered for Linda's blunders, while she pocketed the praise. Every raise I requested was brushed off with the same line. "Budget's tight, maybe next year." And every year, I nodded, swallowed the insult, and kept working. What they saw as compliance was patience. Linda thought she'd staged a ritual execution. She thought humiliating me in front of the team would erase me, reduce me to an example of what happens when you dare step out of line. She thought she'd crushed the last ounce of pride I had left. But I didn't feel crushed. I felt still. The kind of still that comes just before a storm breaks. Walking out of that building, briefcase in hand, sunlight glaring against the glass facade. I wasn't thinking about defeat. I was thinking about doors. How one shuts, another opens. How some doors aren't built to be knocked on. They're built to be kicked in. She thought she'd ended me. All she did was open the door. Most people assumed I lived a small life outside the office. They pictured me going home to a silent apartment, microwaving dinner, maybe watching the late news before bed. That was the version they wanted to believe. The neat little box where Daniel Mercer fit. Reliable, unremarkable, forgettable. They never imagined that when I locked my door at night, I wasn't stepping into solitude. I was stepping into another world entirely. The truth is, my past has never been normal. Before Vantage Dynamics, before Linda Hayes ever snapped her fingers in my direction, I served 10 years in military intelligence. Not the glamorous kind you see in movies, but the kind where patience and paranoia are the only things that keep you alive. I spent nights listening to faint transmissions crackle over static, waiting for a single code word that might save a convoy. I memorized faces, habits, and patterns until I could predict a man's next move before he thought of it himself. That training never leaves you. You don't switch it off just because someone hands you a badge with your name etched under Project Manager. At the office, I learned to watch without being noticed. Every morning, I walked the same loop around the floor, coffee in hand, pausing just long enough to map who arrived when, who lingered too long at whose desk, who shut their laptop a little too quickly when I passed. My colleagues thought I was restless, maybe even obsessive, but I was logging information. Over time, the patterns built themselves into a kind of map, an unspoken network of influence, alliances, and quiet betrayals that Linda manipulated like a conductor leading an orchestra. She had a gift for hiding her greed beneath corporate jargon. When budgets came up, she'd feign sympathy, insisting raises weren't possible because of market downturns or resource realignment. Yet those same quarters, she quietly approved bonuses for herself and her chosen few. HR became her shield, rewriting complaints into misunderstandings, silencing dissent before it could spark into something larger. She siphoned credit from projects, inflated numbers for investors, and reminded us all, without saying it outright, that she was untouchable. Most people saw only what she wanted them to. I saw the cracks, the hushed conversations behind glass walls, the altered reports that didn't match raw data, the sudden departures of people who asked too many questions. I started keeping records. At first it was a habit, the same way I used to jot down coordinates in the field. But as the years passed, it became something else. Insurance, evidence, a quiet weapon waiting for its day. It was easy enough to slip into the system. When Linda ordered a new IT overhaul 5 years ago, she had me shadow the contractors for efficiency tracking. She thought it was busy work beneath her notice. What she didn't realize was that I memorized every step of the infrastructure and built myself a backdoor, an access point hidden under layers of legitimate code, something no audit would ever flag. From that moment on, every file, every message, every internal call passed under my eyes. Old instincts never die. For years, I didn't use it for more than observation. It was enough to know I had it, enough to watch her empire spin while she thought no one was keeping score. But after she fired me in front of everyone, after she spat those words like venom, I sat down in my small apartment and pulled up the archive. The office phone system had been one of the first things I looped into my access. No one ever questioned the IT patches I submitted. It all looked routine, maintenance logged in the system. But every call had been saved. Hours of her voice, rehearsed and polished, dripping with contempt, when she thought no one else was listening. I scrolled until I found the one I knew would be there, the call she made after firing me. I slipped on my headphones, leaned back in the chair, and pressed play. Her laugh filled the room, high, sharp, cruel. "He actually smiled," she told someone on the other end, a man whose voice I didn't recognize. "Like he thought he was walking out with dignity. Pathetic. I should have fired him years ago. Dead weight." The man chuckled. She kept going. "Investors love it, though. They think I'm decisive. They don't care about him. They care about me keeping margins clean. He was nothing but excess cost. Now I look strong, and they look happy. Win-win." I let the recording run until it ended. The room was silent again. But something in me shifted. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every person she'd crushed, every career she'd stolen, every drop of loyalty she'd converted into fuel for her own rise. Linda thought she'd humiliated one man. She didn't realize she'd exposed her entire game, and I was the only one who'd been watching long enough to bring it all down. At night, my apartment glowed with the pale blue light of screens, the blinds drawn tight against the city. The desk I worked from wasn't much, just an old wooden table scarred with scratches and rings from coffee mugs. But on it, I'd built something that looked more like a command center than a home office. 2 monitors stacked, another off to the side, each one running feeds I'd tunneled into years ago. I didn't need to step foot inside Vantage Dynamics anymore. I was already there, hidden in its walls like a shadow no one knew existed. I started by mapping the company the way a soldier maps a compound. Every department was a room, every executive a locked door, every transaction a trail of footprints waiting to be read. It wasn't glamorous, just data, numbers, reports, phone logs, emails. But data has a way of speaking when you line it up right. And what it said about Linda Hayes was louder than any gunfire I'd ever heard. Her fraud was elegant in its simplicity. Inflate the revenue streams on quarterly reports, disguise the padding under forecast adjustments, then funnel the difference into accounts routed through shell vendors that looked legitimate on paper. I found contracts signed with names that didn't exist, invoices approved for work that was never performed, and reimbursements flagged as consulting fees that landed directly in accounts linked to her inner circle. Investors saw growth. She saw money that didn't belong to her. It went deeper. Performance reports were falsified, with metrics scrubbed to make her favorite managers look like stars, while those she didn't like, often the ones who questioned her, were buried under doctored failure rates. Promotions and firings weren't about merit. They were about control. She built a hierarchy that served her image, not the company. And every time someone fell on the sword of her decisions, she climbed another rung higher. I traced kickbacks flowing through a web of subsidiaries, each one designed to hide the siphoning. It was a labyrinth, but not an unfamiliar one. I'd studied networks far more complex in my old life, ones designed to fund operations overseas without drawing government attention. Linda's scheme wasn't sophisticated by comparison. It was arrogant, and arrogance always leaves openings. I didn't move fast. Speed is the enemy of precision. Each night I built the picture slowly, carefully, making sure every thread connected to something undeniable. A single accusation could be brushed off, a single document dismissed. But 1,000 interlocking pieces? That was a noose tightening around her neck. Sometimes when the screens blurred from staring too long, I leaned back and thought about what I'd given her. The nights I stayed in the office until the cleaning crew arrived. The weekends I spent hammering out proposals while my friends gathered without me. The vacations I canceled because the project couldn't wait. Years of my life traded for loyalty that was never returned. Every time I sacrificed, she cashed another bonus check. Every time I kept the ship afloat, she smiled for the cameras and called herself captain. The rage didn't come like fire. It came like ice, slow and cold, filling the gaps between my ribs until it pressed against my lungs. She hadn't just stolen from me. She'd stolen time I could never reclaim, years carved out of my life, to build an empire she thought she owned. One night, long after midnight, I reached the point where the map was complete. On one screen sat a folder containing every fraudulent contract, every doctored report, every recorded call, where she gloated to her confidants about pulling strings. On another screen was a drafted message ready to burst open across investor inboxes, regulatory agencies, and the press. A single click, and the tower she'd built would collapse in an instant. I hovered over the key. My finger rested on the mouse, and I could almost hear the crash, almost taste the panic that would ripple through her perfect glass tower. For a moment, I imagined the headlines, the ruined face she would have to wear when the world saw her for what she truly was. But I didn't press send. I leaned back, closed the folder, and let the silence of the room swallow me whole. Timing is everything. You don't pull the trigger just because you can. You wait until the moment guarantees not just damage, but destruction. She thought she'd humiliated me. She didn't know I was still here, crouched in the shadows of her empire, watching, waiting, hand steady on the trigger. Not yet. The ballroom glittered with gold and glass, chandeliers pouring light onto polished marble floors. Waiters in black vests carried trays of champagne flutes, weaving between clusters of men in tailored suits and women in sequined gowns. It was a celebration, a monument to excess, the kind of scene Linda Hayes lived for. She stood near the stage, red dress catching the light, her laugh cutting through the air like the crack of a whip. Tonight was her victory lap. The expansion deal had closed, or so she said, and her investors gathered to bask in her glow. I moved among them unseen, not invisible, but forgettable. A guest who looked like he belonged, but no one could quite place. My badge, printed with the name of a minor vendor, bought me silence from anyone curious enough to glance. I held a glass of champagne I wouldn't drink, adjusted my tie like I was just another cog in the machine, and slipped into the rhythm of the room. From the periphery, I watched her work. She kissed cheeks, clinked glasses, and told the same story 3 different ways, depending on who was listening. She was untouchable in their eyes, flawless. On my phone, tucked against my palm, sat the package. One tap, and everything I'd gathered would detonate across inboxes and newsrooms, shredding the illusion she built. My finger hovered more than once, and every time I tightened my grip instead. The urge clawed at me. The moment begged for release. But I waited. Revenge is timing. Strike too soon and your prey limps away, wounded but alive. Strike too late and the jungle swallows you whole. I remembered nights in foreign cities where silence was life, where moving too quickly meant never moving again. The jungle doesn't kill the impatient. It kills the loud. And Linda was still marching deeper into the snare. So I chose a different weapon tonight. Not the kill shot, but whispers. I slipped into conversations with the smallest seeds. A mention of discrepancies in quarterly numbers to one shareholder. A suggestion of duplicate invoices to another. A carefully misplaced document left near the restroom lounge where curious eyes could not resist picking it up. Each was nothing on its own, but together they built unease. Doubt travels faster than truth when the stakes are high. I saw it ripple in their eyes, the faint narrowing, the quiet glance toward her across the room. Linda noticed it too. For the first time, I saw her mask slip. Just for a second. A flash of irritation when two investors whispered behind their hands instead of laughing at her story. She covered it with another drink, another laugh, but her grip on her glass was tighter now. She tugged at her bracelet, shifted her weight, scanned the room with a little more urgency. I didn't smile. I just watched. Because I knew this was the beginning of the unraveling. She'd tighten her grip, double her efforts to look untouchable, and in doing so, she'd pull the rope tighter around her own throat. The beauty of psychological warfare isn't the strike, it's the waiting. Watching them sweat, stumble, overplay their hand. Let them believe the shadows are closing in, because they are. She worked her way to the stage at last, pulling herself taller with every step. The murmurs quieted, the lights dimmed, and a spotlight caught her in its beam. She raised her glass, the room falling into silence as though commanded by some unseen force. Her voice rang out, smooth and rehearsed, cutting through the air with the confidence of someone who believed they'd won the game before it even started. To vantage dynamics, she said, eyes gleaming. To growth, to power, to the future we are building together. We are unstoppable. The room erupted in applause, glasses clinking like gunfire. And I stood there, just inside the shadows, my hand steady, my package ready, my patience sharper than any blade. She thought she was celebrating victory, but all I saw was the perfect stage. Her voice carried through the ballroom like a sermon, steady and commanding, every syllable sharpened for effect. She stood on the stage, red dress gleaming under the spotlight, her glass lifted high as if she were toasting the gods themselves. We are unstoppable, Linda declared, her eyes sweeping across the crowd of investors who leaned forward, eager to believe. She thought she had them, thought her performance sealed the illusion she'd spent years perfecting. The room belonged to her, or so she believed. I was in the back, half hidden behind a column, phone in my hand, the screen glowing faintly. My thumb hovered over the final command. Weeks of assembling, months of collecting, years of silent endurance had brought me to this one moment. The package waited like a coiled serpent, and all it needed was the smallest flick to strike. For a heartbeat, I let myself hesitate, not out of doubt, but to savor the weight of what was about to happen. The quiet before the storm is its own kind of power. I tapped the screen. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Linda continued her speech, spinning promises of record profits and expansion into new markets, her voice dripping with confidence. Then the screens behind her flickered. The presentation slides she had prepared dissolved into black, replaced by rows of documents, scrolling faster than most eyes could follow. The first gasps rippled through the room as numbers appeared, side by side, the polished reports from the company's filings contrasted against the raw, unaltered data. The discrepancies weren't subtle. They screamed fraud. Her voice faltered. "Excuse me," she said, glancing toward the technicians. But the technicians were frozen, staring at the same screens as everyone else. The system was no longer theirs to control. A recording played through the speakers, her voice unmistakable. I should have fired him years ago. Dead weight. Investors don't care about him. They care about me, keeping margins clean. The room went still, investors shifting in their seats, some already pulling out their phones, scrolling, recording. Another document appeared, showing inflated invoices, money siphoned into accounts linked to her closest allies. Then another, performance reviews doctored to bury the names of those she wanted gone. It kept coming, layer after layer, her empire of lies exposed in front of the very people she relied on to keep it alive. Phones buzzed across the hall. Whispers turned into accusations. One investor shouted, "What the hell is this?" Another barked orders into his phone, demanding immediate verification. Linda tried to speak, tried to command the room back under her spell, but her voice was drowned out by the evidence rolling across the screens. Security moved forward, unsure whether to protect her or restrain her. Then the real hammer fell. Emails appeared with the SEC's header. Live alerts triggered from the automated distribution I'd set in motion. The regulators knew. There was no time to bury this, no chance to spin it. The collapse wasn't coming tomorrow. It was happening now. She dropped the microphone, her face pale under the lights. The red dress that shimmered moments ago looked garish, almost grotesque, as her empire crumbled around her. Investors pushed back their chairs, glaring, some shouting threats of lawsuits, others storming toward the exits already dialing their lawyers. She reached for words, but all that came out was a strangled plea. I didn't stay to watch the end. I didn't need to. Her screams echoed behind me as I walked out of the ballroom, cutting through the crowd with the same quiet composure I'd carried since the day she tried to strip me of my dignity. There was no gloating, no victory lap. She was finished, and nothing she could say would change that. Outside, the night air hit me like a cleansing wind. I drew in a breath, long and steady, the first I'd taken in years that felt entirely free. The city hummed around me, but inside I felt still, centered, like the storm had finally broken and left only silence in its wake. Betrayal isn't rare. It wears many faces, bosses, lovers, friends. It thrives in boardrooms and bedrooms alike, feeding on trust until there's nothing left but ruin. But revenge is older than trust. It's the only language the false ever understand. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and walked into the night. The weight I'd carried for over a decade finally lifted. Her empire was gone, her mask shattered, and the world would remember her not as a leader, but as a fraud dragged into the light. This story was over, but betrayal never ends with one name, one face, or one company. There will always be another. And when it comes, I'll be waiting.